In the summer of 1867, in a quiet farming settlement outside Sedalia, Missouri, 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the center of one of the most unsettling medical cases ever recorded in the American Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only doctor for miles around, filled 3 leather-bound journals with his notes about a boy whose actions seemed to go against every rule of human nature that 19th-century medicine understood. To most people, Timothy looked ordinary, even pleasant to be around. But underneath his innocent face was something that science at the time simply could not explain. Over a period of 6 months, 3 people lost their lives in accidents that all seemed to happen near Timothy, along with dozens of farm animals that turned up dead under strange conditions. 11 people in total who had each, in some way, been near the child with the pale blue eyes and a smile that never quite seemed real. Local officials sealed the records away, hiding them for over 100 years. Yet the truth about Timothy Caldwell points to a kind of darkness that forces us to question what we believe about the presence of evil in a child. Before continuing with Timothy's story and the fear that spread across Sedalia County, if you find this story interesting, como uma ordem fria, please remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our explorations into America's most disturbing historical mysteries. And tell us in the comments which state or city you're listening from. We enjoy hearing from our community of mystery lovers all over the world. The events that would make Timothy Caldwell's name whispered for generations did not start with violence, but with loss. Missouri in 1867 was still bleeding from the Civil War. Towns like Sedalia had sent many of their sons to distant battlefields, leaving behind widows, fatherless children, and towns trying to recover. The Caldwell family farm, set in a valley about 15 miles south of town, had once been thriving. James and Martha Caldwell had dreamed of raising cattle and corn there, but those dreams ended when James was killed at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha tried to keep the farm going alone, but she died of consumption in the cold winter of 1865. Their son Thomas, only 21, was left with land he could not manage and debts he had no way of paying. When Thomas learned that his brother William had perished at Andersonville prison, leaving a widow and an 8-year-old boy, he saw both trouble and chance. The child would need a place to stay, and Thomas needed another pair of hands for the never-ending work of farming. Thomas Caldwell had grown into a stern, unbending man, shaped by grief and the war. His wife, Sarah, had become sharp-toned and bitter, after years without children of her own. Neither seemed the best choice for raising a young boy, especially one who appeared at their door in the spring of 1866 with nothing but a small cloth sack and eyes that looked far too old for his face. Timothy Caldwell was slight for his age, with pale skin that burned easily in the hot Missouri sun, and blonde hair that Sarah cut short to keep away lice. He rarely spoke of his life before coming to the farm, giving only bits and pieces when asked. His father had been a soldier. His mother coughed up blood before she died. Afterward, he had stayed with neighbors for a time. What stood out most to grown-ups about Timothy was his politeness. He always replied with, "Yes, sir," or "Yes." He never grumbled about chores or punishments. To most eyes, he was the picture of a well-behaved child. Dr. Samuel Harding first met Timothy in June of 1866 when the boy came with his uncle to town for supplies. Harding, who had studied at Missouri Medical College and was one of the few formally trained physicians west of St. Louis, had learned to read people well after years, treating both Union and Confederate soldiers. Something about the Caldwell boy unsettled him, though he couldn't say why at first. The child was polite in every way, Harding later wrote in his journal. He answered questions clearly, looked people in the eye, and showed none of the shyness or nervousness most country children had around strangers. And yet, I felt uneasy in his company. His stare had an intensity, almost as if he were examining me with the same careful interest I usually reserve for my patients. The farming community around Sedalia was small enough that everyone knew one another's business. The Caldwell farm was set apart, but not so much that neighbors failed to notice things. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who lived next to the Caldwell property, often saw Timothy working in the fields or with the animals. She told her husband she thought the boy labored with a strange focus for someone his age. He never seemed to get tired, never paused to play or rest the way most children did. It was like watching a little machine, she remarked to her husband Samuel one evening over supper. He kept working from sunrise until sunset, without a word of complaint, without slowing down. It isn't natural for a boy to have no play in him at all. The Patterson family also kept chickens, and Eleanor noticed that her birds acted strangely whenever Timothy came close to the fence line. The hens would group together, making noise and flapping their wings, refusing to go near the side where the Caldwell boy stood. Samuel waved it off as coincidence, but Eleanor could not ignore the sense that the animals knew something about Timothy that people could not see. The first death happened on a hot August day in 1866. Little Mary Fletcher, age 5, was the blacksmith's daughter, well known for her cheerful laugh and her habit of wandering off. She had been playing near Willow Creek, a shallow stream that passed through several farms, including the Caldwells. It was Timothy who found her. He came to the Fletcher house just as the family was sitting down for supper, his clothes damp, his face pale, but his voice steady. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said with calmness that seemed out of place. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." A search party hurried to the stream and found Mary face down in water not even 2 feet deep. Dr. Harding was called at once and determined that she had drowned. A sad but not unusual accident in rural places where children often roam near water. What bothered Harding was not the drowning itself, but Timothy's story. The boy gave an unusually detailed account of where Mary's body had been, the exact position she lay in, and even the state of her clothing. When asked why he had been at that exact spot, Timothy said he had been looking for a missing calf. The boy's memory was striking. Harding wrote in his journal. He could describe the exact position of the girl's arms and legs, the way her dress had snagged on a branch beneath the surface, even the shade of the water near her face. Such precision seemed strange for a child who claimed to be frightened by what he had found. When questioned, Thomas Caldwell confirmed that a calf had indeed gone missing earlier that day and that he had sent Timothy to look near the creek. The calf was discovered 2 days later, healthy and grazing far from the spot where Mary drowned. The Fletcher family, heartbroken at their loss, took Timothy's sympathy as kindness. He had, after all, been the one to find their daughter and alert them. At the funeral, Timothy sat quietly beside his aunt and uncle, his head lowered the whole time. When the family thanked him for acting quickly, he replied in the right tone, saying, "I only wish I had found her sooner." His words carried sorrow, but Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the room, noticed something that stayed with her. When Mary's mother broke down in tears, when men cried at the sight of the tiny coffin, Timothy's expression did not change. His head remained bowed, but his pale eyes stayed dry, quietly observing everything around him. The second death came less than a month later. Henrik Lien, an old Norwegian immigrant who had once worked as a logger but had been slowed by arthritis, was found at the bottom of a rocky cliff called Devil's Bluff. The bluff looked out over the same creek where Mary had died, and Henrik often climbed there to check the wild beehives he cared for. And once more, it was Timothy Caldwell who was tied to the discovery. He had been walking back from town when he noticed something strange near the bottom of the bluff. "I saw Mr. Larson's hat snagged on a thorn bush," Timothy told the gathering crowd. "I called out to him, but no answer came, so I climbed down to check. Henrik Larson was found dead, his neck broken from what seemed like a fall from the top of the 40-foot bluff." Doc. Harding's careful examination showed the old man had likely died right away from the impact. The only unusual detail was the presence of several dead bees scattered around his body, far more than one would normally find away from a hive. Mr. Larson knew those bluffs better than anyone in the county, Samuel Patterson told Dr. Harding after the inspection. He had been climbing up there for years. Never had as much as a sleep. It makes no sense he would fall now. Timothy, when questioned, suggested maybe the old man had been stung by bees and lost his balance. He always said how mad they get if you bother them. The boy added, maybe they swarmed him, and he got confused. Dr. Harding found Timothy's explanation possible. Yet something about the scene continued to trouble him. The dead bees were all gathered in a tight cluster right around Henrik's body. If the man had disturbed the hive at the top of the bluff, there should have been signs of bees along his fall path. Instead, it looked like the bees had somehow been placed around the spot where he landed. When Harding climbed up to the top of the bluff to check the hives, he found them untouched and showing no recent disturbance. The worker bees were busy but calm, going about their usual work gathering nectar from late summer wildflowers. The third death shattered any hope that these were just coincidences. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods near his family's small cabin. His body was discovered 4 days later in an old abandoned well nearly half a mile from where he had last been seen. Timothy Caldwell had joined the search party willingly. For 3 days, he searched with the adults, showing unusual stamina for a child his age. He seemed to know the woods like the back of his hand, guiding others through places even long-time residents found hard to cross. When asked how he had learned the woods so well, Timothy explained that he liked exploring them during free time, collecting herbs and plants that his aunt used for cooking and medicine. On the 4th morning, Timothy showed up at the Mills cabin just after sunrise. I think I found something, he told Jacob's father, his voice sounding drained with tiredness. There's an old well about half a mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying. The well was hidden beneath fallen logs and heavy brush. Jacob Mills was lying at the bottom, barely conscious, suffering from thirst and exposure. Dr. Harding was called at once, but the boy died within hours of being pulled up, his small body too weak to recover. The child had been at the bottom of that well for almost 4 days, Harding wrote in his journal. The fact that Timothy Caldwell could locate him in such an obscure spot raises troubling questions. How wide is the boy's knowledge of these woods? What other hidden dangers might he know? Even more troubling was Timothy's behavior during Jacob's final hours. While the Mills family kept vigil at their son's side, Timothy sat quietly in a corner, as if praying. But Dr. Harding, sitting where he could watch the boy without being noticed, saw something chilling. Timothy was not praying. His lips moved, but his eyes were locked on Jacob Mills with an intensity that seemed almost clinical. He looked like he was studying every detail of the dying child. The struggling breath, the pale skin, the way consciousness flickered in and out. When Jacob finally passed, Timothy's face showed no sadness, no shock. Instead, Harding thought he saw something that resembled satisfaction. After the funeral, Dr. Harding went alone to the abandoned well, where Jacob had been found. The place unsettled him for reasons he could not fully explain. The well was hidden well enough, covered by fallen branches and brush that would have taken effort to arrange. Yet Timothy had claimed to hear crying from this spot, a claim that seemed unlikely given the depth of the well and the amount of covering. Looking closer, Harding noticed something the rescuers had missed in their rush to save Jacob. The logs and branches around the rim had not fallen naturally. They had been carefully arranged, forming a camouflage that looked natural, but was almost impossible to see unless you knew exactly where to look. The suggestion was horrifying. Jacob Mills had not stumbled into the well. Someone had placed him there, and someone had hidden the spot until it was too late for the boy to survive rescue. That night, Harding began keeping detailed notes on Timothy Caldwell. If his suspicions were correct, the child posed a danger to the entire settlement. But suspicion was not proof, and proof was exactly what Harding lacked. The trouble was, Timothy appeared to be the model of good behavior. He went to church regularly with his aunt and uncle, sat quietly through service, recited prayers respectfully. He worked hard on the farm, completing chores even grown men would complain about. He always spoke politely to his elders and obeyed authority. Most importantly, Timothy had reasonable explanations for why he had been present at each tragedy. He had been looking for a missing calf when he came across Mary Fletcher. He was walking home when he noticed Henrik Larsson's hat. He joined the search for Jacob Mills, just as any caring neighbor would do. But Harding's medical training taught him to look beyond appearances. During the war, he had treated soldiers and could recognize the signs of men who killed not out of duty or fear, but from something darker inside them. Such men had a coldness, a detachment from normal feelings. They reacted too little to horror or too much interest in pain. They could talk about suffering like it was just another subject to study. Timothy Caldwell showed all of these traits, but trapped in the body of an 8-year-old child. Harding's quiet investigation truly began in October 1866. Using his role as the town's physician, he made regular visits to farms and cabins, pretending to check on families still recovering from the war's hardships. In truth, he was collecting information on Timothy. What he learned painted a troubling picture. The boy seemed to be connected to a growing circle of misfortune. Livestock on nearby farms were dying at unusual rates, not from sickness, but from strange injuries. Chickens were found with snapped necks, supposedly killed by foxes, though no other fox signs appeared. Pigs had strange wounds that grew infected and killed them. Horses suddenly went lame and had to be put down. Eleanor Patterson confessed to Harding that she had lost 17 chickens in just 2 months. "It's the oddest thing," she said. "They die 1 or 2 at a time, always found in the morning with their necks broken clean. My husband blames foxes, but I've never seen tracks around the coop. And the way they're killed, it's too tidy to exact." When Harding examined the latest dead chickens, he saw signs that confirmed Eleanor's doubts. The birds had been killed with careful pressure, applied to specific points on their necks, a method that required real knowledge of anatomy. It was not the random kind of violence people usually see in animal attacks, but something far more planned and deliberate. Similar strange events started appearing on other farms. James Wickham had lost 3 cows to what he at first called strange accidents. Animals that somehow managed to choke themselves with ropes or trap their heads in fence rails in ways that did not make sense. Robert Dunham's prize bull ended up in a ditch with a broken leg, even though it had always been one of the steadiest and strongest animals in the county. In each case, the farms affected were close enough to walk to from the Caldwell land, and more than once neighbors said they had spotted Timothy nearby during the time of these incidents. "I saw him walking by our fence the morning before we found the dead calf," James Wickham told Dr. Harding. "Thought it was unusual, him being so far from home. But the boy was always polite when he saw me, waved, and called out a greeting just like he had been taught." Dr. Harding began paying more attention to Timothy during his regular visits to the Caldwell household. The boy always seemed to be around when Harding came to treat his aunt and uncle for the usual farm injuries and illnesses. Timothy would stand quietly, watching carefully as the doctor worked. What unsettled Harding was not his presence, but the way the boy asked questions. He wanted to know about anatomy and procedures that were far too advanced for his young age. One day he asked, "How can you be certain someone is really dead? Sometimes they only look like they're sleeping." His tone was casual, as if he were asking about the weather. When Harding asked why he wanted to know, Timothy explained that since the farm was far from town, he needed to be ready to help in an emergency if someone got hurt while he was alone. "Uncle Thomas says I should know how to handle such things," the boy added. The answer seemed reasonable, but the question still disturbed Dr. Harding. There was something clinical in Timothy's interest, something that felt less like a child's curiosity and more like cold observation. He asked about the process of dying, how long it might take, what the signs were, and whether a person could survive certain wounds. He listened with the same detached focus that a medical student might have when studying cadavers. To test him, Harding sometimes gave false information, telling him that certain wounds were always fatal when they were not, or that specific symptoms pointed to diseases they did not. Timothy never argued or corrected him, but Harding noticed that the boy remembered everything. He was storing it away. The more chilling moments came when Harding told stories of treating injured soldiers during the war. Most children would show sadness or horror at hearing of battle wounds, but Timothy only leaned closer, asking for details. Did they scream a lot when you cut off their arms? He asked once, his pale blue eyes locked on the doctor's face. Or were they too hurt to make a sound? He asked it politely, almost softly, and yet the question sent a cold feeling through Dr. Harding that he could not shake. By late 1866, Harding had filled 2 whole journals with notes about Timothy. They showed a picture of a boy with an adult's understanding of violence and death, but none of the compassion a child should have. But journals and notes were not evidence, and evidence was what Harding would need if he wanted to protect the people of the county from what he feared was a real threat. That chance came when Thomas Caldwell injured his back during harvest season. The injury forced Thomas to rest in bed, and Harding came daily to treat him. This gave the doctor more time inside the house and more time with Timothy. He began talking with him longer, gently drawing out more of his thoughts. What he learned frightened him. Timothy had been experimenting on living creatures for a long time, maybe for years. Through careful questions and some direct clues, Harding realized the boy had been catching small animals and hurting them on purpose, watching how they reacted, and keeping notes. Timothy mentioned having a cave where he liked to spend time. When Harding went there, he found bones arranged in piles, crude cutting tools made from farm equipment, and detailed drawings showing animals in different stages of injury and death. The pictures were disturbing, not only because of what they showed, but also because of the skill with which they were made. Rabbits, birds, squirrels, even larger animals were drawn in detail, each sketch marked with Timothy's neat handwriting. His notes described how long it took the animal to die, how it reacted, and which methods caused more pain. Subjects stayed awake for almost 10 minutes after removal of eyes. One note read beside a drawing of a rabbit. Crying stopped slowly. Movement ended after pressure on throat. Harding now understood that Timothy had been using the livestock around the community as part of his experiments, testing his cruel methods on bigger and bigger animals. But there was something even worse among the drawings. Some of them no longer showed animals. They showed people. Children and adults were drawn in positions of pain, with notes on their bodies, as though they were part of some study. One picture looked exactly like Mary Fletcher, the first child to die. Another showed Henrik Len. Another was of Jacob Mills, sketched at the bottom of a well, with notes about what lack of water and exposure might do to a human body. Timothy had not just been there when these people died. He had planned it, carried it out step by step, and then recorded the results. Harding was horrified, but also realized he could not simply go to the authorities. The evidence from the cave had been taken in a way that could not be explained as lawful. Worse, who would ever believe that an 8-year-old boy could be a calculating killer? The science of that time had no understanding of psychopathy or antisocial disorder. Most people believed children were born innocent and only turned cruel if they were raised badly. The idea that a child could be born without empathy was unthinkable. Harding knew if he presented what he found, people would likely dismiss him as a man still broken by the war. Timothy would be defended as an orphan acting out his grief, and the killings would continue. So Harding decided to face Timothy directly. On his next visit, he asked the boy to come with him to the pasture. When they were alone, he told Timothy what he had found in the cave. To his shock, Timothy did not deny it. He did not look afraid, nor did he try to explain. He only listened calmly, nodding now and then as if agreeing with Harding's descriptions. "You're not going to tell anyone?" Timothy finally said. His voice was calm, not questioning, but stating a fact. "Why wouldn't I?" Harding asked. Timothy smiled then, the first real smile Harding had ever seen from him. "Because no one will believe you, and because you want to see what I do next." The boy was right, and Harding knew it. His story would sound insane. But worse, Timothy had touched on something Harding could not deny even to himself. A dark fascination. He wanted to keep observing this child, who might grow into the most dangerous person he had ever known. "How long have you been doing this?" Harding asked. "Since I was 5. Timothy answered simply. "Maybe earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things. It's strange to notice how different animals respond to the same treatments, and how people who died reacted to them." Timothy said with a small shrug. "They were experiments too. I wanted to see if humans would behave the same way as animals. For the most part, they do, but people understand what's happening to them much better. That makes it more fascinating." Dr. Harding felt a sharp chill, one that had nothing to do with the biting November wind. "What are you planning to do next?" Timothy thought about the question with serious focus before replying. "I need to learn what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely, someone who wouldn't even imagine any danger until it's already too late." The meaning was unmistakable. Timothy was planning to kill his own aunt and uncle. Jatter. Harding now understood he might have only days, or maybe just hours, before Timothy tried to carry out his plan. The boy had spoken of it with the careless certainty of someone who believed he could never be stopped. From what Harding had seen before, Timothy rarely hesitated once he decided on a course of action. That evening, Dr. Harding made his way to Sedalia to speak with Sheriff William Crawford. The sheriff was a plain-spoken, practical man who had served bravely in the Union Army and had little tolerance for wild theories. Still, he trusted Dr. Harding's instincts and was willing to listen to any evidence, even if it sounded unusual. Harding presented his concerns with great care, sticking to facts rather than long psychological arguments. He laid out the disturbing sketches and notes Timothy had drawn in the cave, pointed to the strange pattern of deaths and so-called accidents linked to him, and explained the boy's deep knowledge of anatomy and cruelty. Most troubling of all, he revealed Timothy's open admission that he planned to kill his relatives. Sheriff Crawford examined the papers slowly, his jaw tightening as he flipped through each drawing. Even with his hardened war experience, some details shocked him. "Even if half of what you're saying is true," he said at last, his voice edged with alarm, "we can't lock up a child just for drawings and suspicions. But we can keep close watch, and we'll be ready to act if he makes a move." The two men worked late into the night, building a detailed plan. Crawford brought in only his most trusted deputies, men who had fought under him during the war and could remain calm even in dangerous situations. Together they devised a strategy. Dr. Harding would arrive at the Caldwell farm at his usual time, bringing medicine under the excuse of treating Thomas's pain. In truth, it would be used to keep both Thomas and Sarah sedated, just enough to prevent Timothy from harming them easily. Meanwhile, Crawford and his deputies would hide themselves in careful positions around the farm, near enough to respond quickly, yet far enough away that Timothy wouldn't notice. The next morning, Harding put the plan into motion. As he steered his buggy toward the farmhouse, unease filled him at once. The normal sounds of the farm, chickens clucking, pigs grunting, the rhythm of daily chores, were gone. An unsettling silence hung heavy in the air, crawling over Harding's skin. Timothy appeared in the doorway before Harding had even stepped down. The boy stood unnervingly still, pale blue eyes locked on him with the focus of a predator. He wore his usual work clothes, but Harding noticed the sleeves rolled high above his elbows. His hands looked freshly scrubbed, the kind of cleansing one might do before messy work. "Good morning, Dr. Harding." Timothy greeted politely, though his voice carried a strange energy underneath, a sharp excitement he seemed barely able to restrain. "I've been waiting for you." The phrasing struck Harding like a warning bell. Waiting meant Timothy had expected him, maybe even counted on this visit, as part of whatever dark plan he was preparing. Inside, Harding found Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lying in bed, both apparently fast asleep. Yet something felt wrong. As he leaned closer to Thomas, he noticed the man's breathing was unusually shallow. His skin tinted a grayish pallor that suggested more than natural rest. "What did you give them?" Harding asked softly, not turning his head, but certain Timothy was watching every motion. "Just some herbs from the woods," Timothy answered with practiced innocence. "There are so many interesting plants growing wild around here. Some have very useful qualities." Checking further, Harding found Thomas's pulse weak but steady. Sarah showed nearly the same signs, deeply unconscious but alive. Timothy had carefully measured the dose. He hadn't wanted them dead, not yet, only helpless. "They won't be waking for several hours," Timothy said conversationally. "That gives us plenty of time to talk without being disturbed." What followed chilled Harding to his bones. Timothy began speaking of murder and cruelty, with the same tone a professor might use when lecturing about science. He described his experiments on both animals and humans in alarming detail, his voice calm, almost eager, as if sharing discoveries. "Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning takes much longer than people think," Timothy explained, settling into a chair as though beginning a pleasant chat. "Everyone assumes a person just slips under and it's over, but that's not true at all. They struggle, they panic, and they make this strange pattern of gasping attempts before finally giving up. I had to hold her down for almost 3 minutes before she stopped fighting." Harding's blood ran cold. "You held her under the water yourself?" Timothy nodded, almost proudly. "She was playing by the creek, and I told her there was a pretty stone under the surface. When she leaned over to look, I pushed her head down and held it. She was so small it didn't take much strength. But she fought harder than I expected. That's when I realized people have much stronger survival instincts than animals. And Henrik Larsson," Timothy went on. "That was more complicated. I couldn't beat him with strength, so I had to think differently. I knew he always checked his beehives on Thursday mornings, so the night before, I loosened some of the stones on the bluff. Then I collected bees from one hive and trapped them in a cloth bag. When Mr. Larsson climbed up, I was hiding behind some rocks. I threw the bag in his face and yelled that there was a swarm attacking him. He panicked, stumbled backward, and fell right over the weakened stones. The drop killed him instantly, exactly as I expected." Timothy's eyes gleamed as he described it, savoring every detail. "And Jacob Mills," Timothy continued, now sounding like a teacher sharing a favorite lesson. "He was the most interesting. I didn't kill him quickly like the others. I wanted to see what happened if someone died slowly, stretched out over days. I lured him into the woods by saying I'd found baby raccoons. He cared about animals, so he followed me without question. I helped him climb down into the old well, then covered the opening with logs and brush. For 4 days, I visited him. I gave him just enough water to keep him alive, but never enough to let him recover. I watched how he weakened bit by bit." Harding realized with dread that Timothy wasn't talking about fantasies anymore. He was confessing real acts, and the boy's tone showed not guilt, but curiosity. "And what do you plan to do with your aunt and uncle?" Harding asked at last, forcing the words out. Timothy's smile spread wider than Harding had ever seen. "That's where you come in, Doctor. All my earlier tests were on people who didn't know what was happening until it was too late. But you're different. You understand what I am and what I'm capable of. That makes you the perfect subject for a brand new type of study." As Timothy spoke, he moved calmly around the room, picking up and arranging objects that Harding recognized instantly as potential weapons. Rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick from the fireplace, several sharp kitchen tools. The boy placed his chosen items in order with a strange kind of discipline, as if preparing for a serious operation. "I want to see what happens when someone who knows their end is coming still tries to save the ones they care for," Timothy continued, his voice steady but filled with excitement. "Will you throw yourself in danger to save Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah? Will you fight me even when you know I already expected that? Or will you try to escape and leave them behind to save your own life, Doctor?" Harding realized the moment for words was gone. Timothy had already revealed enough of his twisted plan to make it certain that everyone in the house was facing deadly risk. He pulled the pistol from his medical bag and aimed it directly at the boy. "Step away from the knives, Timothy," Dr. Harding ordered. His tone calm, though his pulse hammered in his chest. Timothy's eyes fell on the pistol with curiosity instead of fear. "That's a Navy Colt, isn't it?" he asked lightly, as if making small talk. "I've seen drawings of them in books about the war. How many bullets fit inside?" "6, Dr. Harding replied without thinking, instantly wishing he had stayed silent. "And how many people are you really trying to guard?" Timothy pressed. "There's Uncle Thomas, Aunt Sarah, yourself, and no doubt the 3 officers waiting outside. That's 6 lives, if my count is right. So even if you put a bullet in me, you'll have nothing left in the chamber." Timothy stepped closer now, not even trying to keep out of range. "Do you want to know how I became what I am?" he asked, his words carrying an unsettling rhythm. "Do you want to find out if I was born this way or if something turned me into this? You want to know if there are others like me and how you might see them before they begin killing?" His questions cut deep, each one true, each one aimed at Dr. Harding's own curiosity. That was the most disturbing thing of all. Timothy's skill in using people's thoughts against them, turning their own minds into traps. He could read people well enough to control their choices, even when they knew he was pulling strings. The clash began when Timothy crept toward his uncle's bed, rope clutched in his hands. Dr. Harding lunged to stop him, but Timothy moved with startling speed, slashing with a kitchen blade and cutting the doctor's arm. What followed was short but brutal. Timothy fought like a cornered wild animal, fierce and unrelenting, his knife, hand striking with practiced accuracy. Though smaller and not as strong, he was quick, flexible, and frighteningly precise, like someone who had spent long hours studying the weaknesses of the human body. Dr. Harding managed to twist his wrist and knock the blade loose, but almost at once Timothy pulled another knife from his clothing. It became clear he had hidden weapons throughout the house, planning ahead for every move. The noise of the fight pulled Sheriff Crawford and his deputies from their hiding spots. They stormed to the back door to find Harding locked in struggle with the boy, while Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lay unconscious, unaware of the chaos around them. Deputy Mitchell seized Timothy while Dr. Harding, gasping for air, rushed to check the couple's condition. When it was over, Timothy Caldwell sat calmly against the wall. Clothes torn, face streaked with blood, but those pale, piercing eyes still carried that same cold cleverness that had unnerved Dr. Harding months earlier. "You can't prove anything," Timothy said as deputies tied him up with rope. "No one will believe a child was behind all those deaths." Sheriff Crawford stared down at him, a strange mix of revulsion and grim interest on his face. "Maybe not," he replied, "but we don't have to prove it all. Trying to murder your kin is enough to see you locked away no matter your age." Timothy grinned at that, the same eerie smile Harding had noticed the day before. "You won't hang me," he said firmly. "I'm too young, too fascinating. Someone will want to study me instead." And just when it seemed the nightmare in Sedalia County had reached its peak, it grew even darker. Timothy Caldwell was wrong about his future, but right about how impossible it was to tie every crime to him. When Sheriff Crawford presented the evidence from the cave, prosecutors dismissed it just as Harding had feared. The drawings, writings, and strange notes were brushed aside as the troubled imaginings of a boy scarred by losing his parents. The repeated deaths and accidents were explained away as coincidence, worsened by Timothy's odd presence at so many tragedies. But the attack on Thomas and Sarah could not be ignored. 3 lawmen had seen him, knife in hand, ready to kill his sleeping relatives. No one could deny what that meant. An 8-year-old boy, by choice, had tried to murder his family. The courts of 1867 had no rule book for something like this. Timothy was far too young to be tried as an adult, but far too dangerous to be sent to a simple orphanage or school for troubled children. The case drew attention across Missouri, forcing judges, doctors, and scholars to debate what should be done. After weeks of arguments, A compromise was reached. Timothy would be placed in the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane at Fulton, where doctors known as alienists would study him and attempt treatment. No one was truly satisfied. Prosecutors wanted him tried as a killer, while defenders insisted a child couldn't be fully guilty. Among doctors, some thought he could be saved, while others warned he was already lost. Dr. Harding himself chose to accompany Timothy and stayed at the hospital for 3 months, recording his behavior and working with staff to understand the boy. His reports later became one of the earliest serious studies of violent behavior in children, though they wouldn't be published until many years later. Timothy quickly adapted to life in the hospital. Just as he had done before, he learned to copy emotions he didn't feel. He fooled several doctors into thinking he was making true progress. He could cry with such skill it seemed real, apologize with convincing regret, and act grateful in ways that made others believe he was healing. But Harding watched carefully and saw through the act. The boy wasn't recovering, he was studying, building a catalog of human feelings and learning how to fake them whenever needed. Harding wrote in his notes, "The subject shows high intelligence but no true emotions. He can perform human feelings well enough to trick casual watchers. But careful observation reveals the show is hollow." Timothy views joy as the face people make when they want something pleasant to last, and sadness as the look used when they want help. But he has never truly felt either one. Harding's deeper examinations uncovered even more chilling truths. When Timothy thought he had gained Harding's trust, he began to share ideas for experiments. These ideas made his earlier crimes seem small. He described tests involving pain, fear, and manipulation, built with eerie attention to detail. Harding recorded privately. He has created scenarios of human suffering with careful imagination and advanced understanding. If he is ever allowed to grow older and gain resources, he could become one of the most dangerous individuals in this country's history. The hospital files show that Timothy stayed at the institution for 1.5 years. During that time, several strange and troubling events occurred that carried the clear marks of Timothy's style. Other patients turned up dead in situations that at first looked like accidents or natural deaths, but on closer inspection showed signs of deliberate planning. 3 older patients passed away from what was listed as heart failure soon after spending time with Timothy, though all had been in fairly good health before. 2 younger patients suffered serious injuries from falls that seemed like random accidents, but both happened in areas where Timothy had been seen earlier that same day. What unsettled people the most were reports from patients who swore Timothy had been slipping into their rooms at night, standing silently at their bedsides, staring at them while they slept. Hospital employees who worked near Timothy also started facing disturbing problems. Several nurses said they were having ongoing nightmares after shifts with the boy, often dreaming about violent or deadly scenarios that felt too real. 2 attendants even asked to be moved to different wards, saying they constantly felt as though someone was watching them, even when Timothy was supposed to be locked in his room. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, who had been brought in as an expert to help treat Timothy, discovered that the boy had been secretly keeping a personal notebook. He had convinced a nurse to give him paper and a pencil, under the excuse of writing therapy, saying that putting his thoughts on paper would help him deal with his feelings more effectively. On the surface, the journal contained exactly what Timothy had said, page after page of simple entries about his emotions, his supposed regrets about what he had done before, and his hope to change in the future. The writing seemed childlike, filled with innocent words, and gave the impression of a damaged but redeemable boy struggling to overcome painful memories. But Dr. Fitzgerald's training in European psychiatric practices had included an awareness of secret communication codes. When she applied those methods to Timothy's writings, she uncovered that his simple notes were actually hiding an advanced code. When decoded, the entries revealed Timothy's true thoughts and plans in alarming detail. Instead of showing real guilt or a desire to change, Timothy was carefully studying the hospital its staff, and its security systems. His main goal was not just to escape, but to use his time in confinement as a training ground to develop more effective methods for manipulation and killing. One decoded passage read Day 47. Decatel. F believes my tears in today's session were genuine. Her reaction shows more sympathy and less suspicion. Estimate 3 more weeks of this act will be enough to build full trust and allow physical contact in sessions. The discovery of Timothy's secret journal led to stricter security measures and less contact between him and hospital staff. But Timothy, as always, adapted quickly. He shifted his focus from emotional manipulation to closely studying daily hospital routines and looking for possible escape routes. By the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell vanished from the Missouri State Hospital in a way that was never completely explained. The official inquiry claimed he somehow slipped away during a transfer between buildings, even though several guards had been assigned to watch him the entire time. Dr. Harding, however, suspected that Timothy's escape was far more advanced than the official version made it sound. Timothy had shown remarkable patience and careful planning during his entire stay, and Harding believed he had spent months preparing his getaway. Evidence uncovered after his disappearance showed that Timothy had been playing the staff more effectively than anyone had realized. Guards later admitted that in the weeks leading up to his escape, they had made small exceptions for him, allowing him longer exercise breaks, giving him extra books, or slightly changing his daily routine. On their own, each of these things seemed harmless, but together they may have opened the door for Timothy's carefully planned escape. He spent 18 months studying that hospital and every person inside it. Dr. Harding wrote in his last report on the case. By the time he left, he knew the psychology of each worker better than they knew themselves. His escape wasn't a rash move. It was the result of a perfectly calculated plan. In the following months and years after Timothy's disappearance, Harding gathered reports of strange deaths and suspicious accidents throughout the Midwest. Many of these cases carried clear signs of Timothy's methods: staged accidents ending in sudden death, proof of systematic torture of animals, and sightings of a boy who appeared unusually charming, helpful, and mature for his age. The problem now was that Timothy was older, likely strong enough to overpower adults, and far too intelligent to make the mistakes that had once exposed him. His intense study of human psychology, combined with his natural cleverness and total lack of moral boundaries, had created something America had never seen before. Dr. Harding spent the rest of his career collecting these cases and trying to fully understand what Timothy Caldwell represented. After Harding's death in 1891, his private notes were found to contain hundreds of pages of possible Timothy-related incidents, along with deep reflections on the idea of evil itself and whether some people might simply be born without the ability to feel guilt or compassion. Timothy's case went on to shape conversations about criminal justice, child psychology, and mental health treatment for many years. His ability to fool trained doctors and specialists raised uneasy doubts about whether psychiatric evaluations could always be trusted. His gift for manipulation forced people to reconsider the idea that all children are innocent and capable of redemption. After their ordeal, Thomas and Sarah Caldwell abandoned their farm. They could not bring themselves to live in the place where they had unknowingly sheltered a murderer for nearly 2 years. The land was eventually taken over by the county and sold to developers in the 1890s, but locals avoided the area for decades. The cave where Timothy had carried out his experiments was sealed by Sheriff Crawford after the boy's arrest. Though its memory lived on, people in the region whispered that the land was cursed and that even animals refused to graze nearby. In 1923, Dr. Harding's daughter donated his journals to the Missouri Historical Society, believing that their scientific value outweighed the disturbing material they contained. Today, the journals remain preserved in the archives, open only to serious researchers with legitimate reasons for studying the darker corners of psychological history. Thomas and Sarah never again spoke about their experience with Timothy. Both lived under false names for the rest of their lives, as if haunted by the fear that he might someday come back to finish what he had started. Sarah died in 1889 and Thomas in 1894. Neither ever had children. Just before his death in 1891, Dr. Harding wrote one last note about the case. I have spent 24 years trying to understand Timothy Caldwell, and I fear the conclusion is grim. He was not a freak accident. He was a glimpse into what humanity could become if stripped of the moral compass we assume is natural. If he survived into adulthood, then somewhere in America walks a man who knows human psychology better than any expert, who can manipulate others with uncanny skill, and who views people only as subjects for cruel experiments. This chilling story shows that evil can hide behind the mask of innocence, and our beliefs about childhood may be far more naive than we want to admit. The case of Timothy Caldwell forces us to wrestle with unsettling questions about moral development and whether some individuals might truly be born without empathy or conscience. What do you think of this case? Do you believe everything has been revealed? Or could there be more to Timothy's fate than the official records suggest? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know how you feel about this dark chapter in American history. If this story kept you hooked and you'd like more like it, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves mysteries as chilling and complicated as this one. Remember, reality often proves more terrifying than fiction, and the past holds secrets that still challenge how we see human nature. See you in the next story.